Hey, personal health and wellness, welcome back. We are looking at stress today, and I know that you are probably stressed the second you log on to this module because you're hoping that I don't drop another 33-minute bomb vlog on you, and I haven't. This one is way shorter, so uh, calm your stress. But we are looking at a component of American life that is almost affecting everyone down to the youngest of ages imaginable, and that is the component of stress. And how that affects us is very dependent upon a myriad of things. But if you would go back to the dimensions of your health, there are probably several items there that we could reference back to and say, this helps and this doesn't. But one thing we know for sure is that every American gets stressed. And so from that, what we want to do is we want to pose some thoughts onto this. I'm going to be working today from a website called stress.org, and you can see the link right there. I'm going to bring that over into the screen here in just a few minutes. But it gives a definition of stress as a condition or feeling experienced when a person perceives that demands exceed the personal and social resources the individual is able to mobilize. So basically what they're saying there is that a person has an experience, and that experience makes them perceive or believe that they are not equipped to handle it. So one of those things that kind of comes up for me is, if I start to see an unforeseen financial burden come up during a specific month and it's outside of what we budgeted for. But, like we talked about in that financial video, if our emergency fund is fully funded, then most of the time that emergency stressor or financial burden is something I can hit pretty fast and easy and forget about, and then I just pay myself back. And that's no fun, but it's also better than asking a credit card or a bank to pay for it for me and then having to pay them more money and being in debt, right? So stress is very real and it does affect us, but you know what? Sometimes it's more of a perceptional threat than it is a real threat. Now, there are those times where it's a real threat. Somebody's trying to get in your house, it's the middle of the night. That's a real threat. How do you handle that? So stressor, an event where the body tries to adapt. And I really like how this definition works because, we always try to adapt first. And that's kind of the general response. And I'm going to get into that here in a minute. But we will try to adapt. And we either do or we don't. We'll see that here in a moment. But there are two different types of stress. And most people think that when I say the word stress, they immediately think it's a bad thing. Um, Listen, when I'm going to go on my run here in just a little bit, it's going to stress my body. Whether that be the heat of the day or whether that just be the fact that I'm having to move, it's going to be stressful. But it's going to be a good stress, and that's eustress. And what we have to understand is that eustress, or positive stress, affects the body very similarly as distress does. I mean, we see a lot of the same physiological responses, but distress, that's the negative stress, that's the one that we think of the most, that's a negative response to that perceived or very real threat. And so when we look at this, what we have to understand is that there are two variations of stress. And what we understand about those is that our body does respond in a similar way to both of those, but when our bodies get to experience things that are eustressful, then we actually make some adaptations that are very positive. But when we experience things that are very distressful, we can make some adaptations that are very negative. And so we look at this and then we further see a subdivision of stress in that it can be acute or it can be chronic. Acute meaning that it happens very rapidly and it doesn't last very long. Chronic means that it probably came about very slowly and it lasts for a very long time. A good example of chronic stress is debt. And as it starts to come on, it starts to build. and many times it gets out of hand, just like we talked about with our financial literacy video. So when we consider how debt can be chronic as it builds and builds and builds and builds, there can be negative impacts on our life. We now look at kind of some other definitions for eustress and distress, and what I kind of tried to do is I tried to deliver more of a compare and contrast here. But a good eustress is marriage, and some of you out there are like, no, I don't ever want to be married, and I really honestly have to tell you it's been the best part of my life, and I completely understand why at some point in your life you may have said that you didn't want to be married. But I can tell you this, that without my marriage, I would be bankrupt. And I don't mean financially, I mean in life in general. And so I look at that from a very positive thing. Are there things that are going to happen in a marriage that are pretty difficult to deal with? Absolutely. That's why it's definitely something that you have to work at. But it's also something that's highly beneficial to me. Distress is a divorce. It's the very opposite of a good thing and very negative in the impact that it has on our life. A eustress is a new baby. And some of you are like, no, not a new baby. Well, if you have 5, then yeah, a new baby might be kind of distressful. But if it's your first one, many times, and especially if it's planned and expected, it's the greatest joy next to marriage. So a distress, and this is kind of a far-reaching one, but just a loss of any family member would be very negatively impacting our lives. A eustress would be a new job or promotion. It's stressful when you have a new job or you get a promotion because there are new responsibilities, and sometimes we don't always accommodate to those very well, at least initially. And so there's some stress there. But the benefit is typically perceived as good. However, a loss of job, being fired, or losing work, that's very distressful. And that causes a lot of heartache and negative impact on our lives. A great workout for me is a very eustressing thing. There's nothing better about my day away from my family than the workout part. I very much enjoy that and look forward to it, and I use that as a way to positively propel my life all the way around. It makes me better. It makes me more kind. It makes me more accepting. It makes me more excited about doing things. And so that is a very eustressing event, where a very distressful event might be an injury. And I've had those before. And you're going to hear me talk about that when we get into the cardiovascular system, about how injuries are going to happen, but they're better than the alternative of not working out. And so injuries do happen. They're distressful, but I know, because I'm an athletic trainer and a physical therapist assistant, how to deal with that. That's just something that I get to do, right on hand. Making more money than you spend. Did you catch that? Let me say that again. Making more money than you spend, sounds familiar, is something that we look at as a eustressing thing. Sure, it's stressful to make that money and then to know what to do with it, to be a good steward with your money, but it's always better than having debt on the other side, right? A close relationship with positively driven people. These are the only kind of people that you want in your life. And let me assure you that, because of where I'm at in life, I've been a part of both positively driven people and negatively driven people. And the more often I spend time around positively driven people, I find that there's a direct connection to me being positive as well and good things happening in my life. The more time I spend around negatively driven people, I tend to fall into that. And that's a pit that I don't want to be in. And so it can be a very distressful event. So let's talk about this stress response. It's a general response, and it's well known. And if you had psychology, you probably heard about the general stress response, but it's in 3 stages. And these 3 stages are down below. First of all, an alarm stage. This is your fight or flight or die stage. And when it happens, you're alerted to something that could be, a threat. Could be a perceived threat, could be a real threat, but it's a threat. And so you're alerted. What are you going to do? Are you going to fight it? You're going to flight it? Or are you going to die? The next stage is the stage of resistance. And that is our adaptive stage. Excuse me. And that's where we either make an adaptation or we fall into stage 3, and that is death. And very, very unoften do people do that with stress. But, it's out there, and we need to understand that that's just how we will react. And so with this general stress response, we have to understand that it comes from a position of being in homeostasis, which is, where we all want to be. That's our equilibrium. It's a parasympathetic state. Everything is even and comfortable, kind of like what you're doing right now. But then if I said you're going to log out of this video and take a test, things would become alert. You would have to become in the sympathetic position, or very much the stress response, also known as the alert stage, right? And you would either adapt or you would die. Not you would die to my test. I'm sure you've already considered how difficult this information is, and it's not bad, is it? So there's some physiology that we want to look at here. First of all, the parasympathetic, that's our homeostatic state. Well, we have a nice constricted pupil. We're not letting a lot of light in because we don't need to. We don't need a lot more than what our brain can handle. We're just doing some normal salivation, some normal heart rhythm, our normal breathing with our constricted bronchi, and our activity through our gut is just happy and doing its normal thing. But then, you know what? There's a stressor that comes in. Whether that's eustress or distress, there's a stressor that comes in. And when that happens, our pupils get bigger. Why? Because they want to let a lot of light in. They want to let a lot of information into our brain, and that's how we get it many times. We also start to decrease our salivation. Why? Because we're going to reserve that back, just in case we need extra hydration. We're going to relax our bronchi. And you know what's going to happen there is we need to breathe heavier because we may need that oxygen. And then our heart rate is going to go up because it's going to prepare us for a potential fight or flight. Our digestive activity, it's going to be restricted. And that is because we don't want blood going into our gut. We want blood going to our extremities, muscles. We want to stimulate glucose to be released by the liver. That's a stressful event. We need energy. Glucose is stored regularly in the liver. That's sugar. And it's ready to go at the moment's notice of stress. That's important for us to remember, by the way, all of these things as we go to the next slide. But let's also look at this, a secretion of epinephrine and norepinephrine from the kidney. You know what epinephrine is. That's the adrenaline hormone, right? And then our bladder relaxes. Ooh, that could be bad. But we don't think about if we need to go to the bathroom. Have you ever been in an emergency and thought, I need to stop and pee? No, you haven't. But it also contracts our rectum, keeping that bathroom end secure as well. So we look at some of these effects of stress, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this one, but what you want to look at very specifically is headaches are caused from stress, heartburn is caused from stress, rapid breathing is caused from stress, depression, insomnia, weakened immune system. All these things, these are stress-caused events from chronic stress. So we want to look at this a little deeper. The cardiovascular disease issue is directly related to stress. Remember, that's heart disease, the #1 killer in America. It kills more Americans than anything else, right? Cardiovascular disease. How does it happen? Because of plaque and vasoconstriction, as well as heart attacks, linked directly from stress. The muscular system. That means the muscles, they get tight, and when they get tight, they stay tight. And when they stay tight, you know what? We have pain. And I found that while working in athletic training and physical therapy for so long, when people have pain, they don't like to move. And when they don't like to move, they get weak. And when they get weak, that's typically when further injury comes in. And when further injury comes in, they get more weak because they have more pain. And then they move less. And so it's a cycle of pain, tightness, no movement, pain, tightness, no movement, pain, tightness, no movement, ultimately leading to a lot of weakness. Our immune system becomes deficient as stress limits or kills our immunity cells. And so this is an important thing too. Stress directly affects how much immunity we have. And if it's affected, then we get sick more. And that's something that we don't want. The other side of this, digestive system issues, we talked a minute ago about this one specifically, but extra glucose comes from the liver, and that's great if you need extra glucose to escape a bear that just ran into the room, but it's not good if it happens often because that spikes blood sugar, and if you spike blood sugar a lot, eventually that's going to cause you to be at risk for type 2 diabetes. And I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about diabetes in the upcoming module and linking it back in with nutrition in another future module. But one thing that we want you to remember right now is that every time you spike glucose, it makes insulin very unhappy. So let's keep that in mind as we go forward. Other physical effects are weight, hair, and skin problems, which none of us want weight, hair, and skin problems. We want weight, hair, and skin amazing issues going on. Like we have a lot of hair, we have great skin, and our weight is totally under control, right? So why would we want to bring stress in to cause us to gain weight, lose hair, and have bad skin? How about this one? Diabetes comes in, digestive problems come in, libido issues. Oh, wait. So you're telling me that sexual function is, yep, I'm telling you, that stress can definitely limit your ability to be sexually active. Stress and the mind, there's an aggravate or cause onset of a mental disorder. So what are we saying there? That the stress that is chronic affecting the mind could lead to Alzheimer's or even dementia. So we know that these are issues that are connected very well with stress. And so what are the big sources of stress? Well, for most of us, it's change. It's the fact that we have to make a move or change a job or change schools. It's performance, whether or not we did very well at something that we were trying to do well at or didn't. Relationships are another issue. How many times have you stressed over a relationship? This is everybody out there, right? We all stress over our relationships. If they're positive relationships or negative relationships, we still stress about them. We have conflict. That always causes stress. We don't like conflict. Confess it to one another and then end it, because that makes everything better when you have good relationships and you don't have conflict. Goals are the center of all this sources of stress. If we have unmet expectations, then for sure we're going to have stress. Because the unique thing here is there is reality and there is expectation. And in the middle of that, you can find a nice little level. And if you move your level closer to reality, then it's going to move away from expectations. And as long as you know that, you're probably going to be a happier person. Next, some of our management strategies. Here's what we want to talk about. We want to talk about, do you have internal resources? You need internal resource building, and that is your psychological hardiness. And some of us are really going to have to fight to get this because we weren't born with it. We were nurtured about this, and for most of us out there, this is not something that came naturally, but we need things to help us become psychologically hardy. And how do we do that? Well, we need to practice that. We need to put ourselves in positions that are not easy to get out of. Like, we might have a challenge like a video game that just kind of is difficult to take care of. My son is a perfect example of this. He was playing a baseball game, and when he was losing the baseball game on a video game, he just closed it down and started a new game. And I said, you're not going to do that, or you're not going to play that video game. And he really didn't like that. But what I'm trying to do is develop his psychological hardiness of understanding that the real world doesn't work that way. One thing that I also will participate in my own life is a run. If I go on a run and I'm really having a hard time, I always tell myself, finish the run. It's going to develop your psychological hardiness. I often like to run on days when I'm really, really tired from doing a lot of other things. It just helps me develop some psychological hardiness. What can you do to develop your psychological hardiness? We're about to find out because we're going to ask you the question. Number 2 is exercise, fun, and recreation. And what we have to understand is that exercise is stress. When you go out and you exercise, you're going to stress your body. You're going to develop some eustress. But that stress is a positive thing, and it's going to give you positive things in return. And so what we know is that this fun thing is now recreation. We're having fun, even if that's volleyball or maybe golf. It's recreation, but it's also exercise because you're getting out and moving. And that's a positive thing for us, and it's a great management strategy. A basic wellness measure that we can participate in is eating high quality foods. We're going to talk about that in a future module. We're going to talk about sleep. And sleep is a very critical component to our health, and we're not going to let this slide by. We want to talk about getting good quality sleep and how much. This is probably the shortest module we'll take in this class, but it's incredibly crucial, and most of us are missing the mark on sleep. Avoid alcohol. Most of us know that alcohol is not a good thing, that it ultimately leads to sometimes really, really bad things. But we know that if we can avoid it and decrease our consumption, then we're going to do better. Also, tobacco will help us to reduce our stress, even though most of us would say, if I could just have a cigarette, this will lower my stress. And if you smoke, you're probably saying, yep, you just don't know it, Kendall. But listen, I used to use tobacco. I do understand. I know what you're going through. But I'm telling you that since I have actually quit tobacco for many, many years now, I found that my stress levels are lower. We'll talk more about that one in a future module as well. So this next one is looking at some of our behavior modifications. And what I want to talk about here is this thing called downshifting. And I want to look at this from a little more in-depth perspective, and that means going back to that idea of what our expectations are versus reality. And maybe sometimes we downshift. We don't expect that we're going to live in the biggest house in the neighborhood and drive the newest car. Maybe sometimes we have, a little less material-wise that require a little less of us financially, and that's a great way to downshift. Making things a little more simple in our life. And that helps us to reach that reality versus expectation, because the distance between there is usually anguish and stress. Thought and emotion management, and that is negative thoughts and anger. We look at how these intentional emotional distributions can occur. Remember that from the first video. And so what we want to look at is we want to make good, solid, intentional, emotional distributions. And so when I hit my head on the counter because I raised up too fast, I don't try to rip the door off the counter. Instead, I walk away from the counter and come back when I'm nice and calm, and I shut the counter calmly. That way I don't have a financial burden of replacing a counter door. Almost sounds like that happened, huh? Some social support is always a crucial item in managing stress. We are designed to be in community, and we are better when we're a part of a community. And so who is your social network? And I'm not talking about your 4,000 followers on Instagram. What I'm talking about is your 2 or 3 friends that are super duper close and they like to talk to you, because that's who matters, and that's who can help you get through these situations. Relaxation techniques, taking a breath. Listen, it sometimes is important for us to back up, go away from something for a while, and then come back to it. You know that when you've done that, you've been better, don't you? Think about those examples in your own assignment here in just a few minutes. Think about those examples. And then spiritual practice. For me, prayer and meditation is an important part of my daily life, and it helps me to stay leveled. And many times when I don't want to, I still do, and I find it beneficial. And I'm going to encourage you to consider the same thing. I hope that your day is stress-free. I hope that everything's going well. I will be seeing you very soon. Look for the module assignment right below in our vlog quiz. See you soon.